All rise. We will away. Please be seated.
Mr. Backrash, before you continue, two brief matters. The pursuant to the requests for extra time tomorrow, the registry has confirmed the availability of an extra 2 hours, and I invite counsel to meet with the legal officers after we rise today to decide how the additional time is going to be apportioned. The other matter is that I don't know whether Mr. Jordash had been alerting the chamber to an motion that he was considering making, but the possibility or the chamber will not be amenable to receiving additional submissions in written form. Thank you. Yes, Mr. Backrash, you may continue.
Excuse me, Mr. President, I apologize for interrupting. I think in terms of the parties conferring after the proceedings and discussing time allotments for tomorrow, it would be useful for us to know whether in fact the defense are going to be limited to the scope of the prosecution rebuttal remarks, or in fact they have latitude to reopen their arguments from today or to continue where they left off today, because of course this really then is a change. I think that's, well, we think it would be unfair. But in any event, I think it would be helpful to know what is the scope of the additional time that's been granted to the parties.
At this point, I would prefer to rely on the experience of counsel looking at other matters to sort this out with the assistance of the legal officers. As Mr. Stringer has said, we are probably in somewhat new territory, so I would not wish to indicate any views myself. But I believe if there is a problem that counsel cannot resolve, then of course it would come back into the lap of the trial chamber. But I leave it to the good sense and experience of counsel and the legal officers to sort this out.
Časni sude, pre pauze.
Your Honors, before the break, I discussed part of the prosecution's final trial brief and closing arguments. Saying that the prosecution case, namely that Simatovic had made a significant contribution to the common criminal purpose through his associates and operative officers, including Captain Dragan. The prosecution claims that Simatovic played a key role in sending Captain Dragan to the Republic of Serbia and Krajina, and in organizing the training at the Golubic camp. My colleague, Mr. Petrovic, has already presented detailed argument and evidence showing that Golubic had been established long before Captain Dragan had come to Knin. For their assertions that Simatovic played a key role in sending Captain Dragan there and organizing the training, the prosecution has no evidence that would impose such a conclusion beyond a reasonable doubt. As we saw yesterday, the prosecution wanted to show you an interview given by Captain Dragan, from which the only conclusion we say that can be made is that they had been in touch before Captain Dragan went to Knin. And for the Simatovic defense, this is not in dispute. There is abundant evidence on that, and you've seen one piece yesterday. Speaking of Captain Dragan, in this part of the case, again, the prosecution is being selective to suit their own needs. Before saying that he had even become a friend of Simatovic's, he said explicitly, Frankie is an intelligence man. In that period, meaning the period when they were in contact, April-May 1991, that branch of the service was busy collecting evidence from the ground. So that bit when he says that he had become sort of friends with Simatovic is from the same interview given by Captain Dragan. In this case, again, the prosecution not only neglects the totality of the evidence in the case, but they interpret those pieces of evidence that they use partially. They artificially tear up exhibits using only bits of them that they believe could support their case. Also, the prosecutor yesterday showed P-1961, which is an official note dated 13 April 1991. It was made by Franco Simatovic about his contact with Captain Dragan. The prosecution takes from that document only one page and takes only the first sentence from it. It takes it out of context and tweaks it to fit its own theory. In reality, at the very beginning of that official note, Simatovic states that he had that meeting with Daniel Snedden on 13 April 1991 in order to consider the possibility of his possible future use according to the plan that had been presented to the man at their previous contact. However, when we analyze this official note, it becomes clear that this cited possible future use relates to Captain Dragan's contacts with a minister in the government of Israel and his other acquaintances that may be of interest. That is explained in the rest of the document. This is just one example among many that we discussed at the very beginning of our closing arguments. Quite deliberately and intentionally, the prosecution presents only parts of the entire body of evidence, both in their final trial brief and in their closing arguments, using parts of sentences, frequently incomplete, taken out of context and out of the essence of the document itself, in order to construct their story. It is clear from that document and other exhibits that this whole matter of possible cooperation regards Daniel Sneden's contacts in Israel and possibly other intelligence services. There is not a hint of the possibility of his being engaged by the service, by the SDB. This is a striking example indeed of how the prosecution has handled the evidence in this case. The second section of the SDB administration, Belgrade, put forward a proposal to put Captain Dragan under operative technical surveillance back on 18 December 1990, because Captain Dragan was identified as a representative of American Airlines. This proposal to put Dragan under surveillance was made by operative officer of the Belgrade Center, Filipovic, the head of section in the Belgrade Center, Simatovic, deputy head of the second section, Zjalic, and the head of the second section, Bajovic. So this group of people wanted to investigate Sneden as a possible agent of another intelligence service, a foreign intelligence service. Franko Simatovic was head of the one section that was involved in this proposal. They made the proposal to make Captain Dragan a target of processing by the SDB. A section was the lowest organizational unit in one of several divisions within one center, and there were several such centers in the SDB of Serbia. This proposal to put Sneden about surveillance had to pass through all the instances we have already enumerated in order to reach the desk of the Republic Secretary for the Interior, who then decided in writing that there was good reason to tap Sneden's phone and follow him, as well as other persons of interest. In our final trial brief, and the defense has presented ample evidence on the wiretapping of Captain Dragan in chronological order from the beginning of 1990 and throughout 1991. The defense highlighted over 50 pieces of evidence that unambiguously indicate that Captain Dragan went to Knin with the mediation of other people, not because he was sent by Franko Simatovic. Witness Lucic explained this situation in detail, and his evidence accords with material evidence. The report of 28 March 1991 about applying surveillance to Captain Dragan shows that the SDB Belgrade had established that on 14 March 1991, Snedden had come from the USA, and the same day established contact with Dejan Lucic and Aleksandar Pavic. Operative officers found out that on 15 March 1991, Snedden had several conversations from which they found out that he, Lucic, and Pavic were getting ready to travel to Knin, Krajina. Pavic telephoned Captain Dragan, and in fact, Pavic used Captain Dragan's telephone to call Žarko Zečević, president of the Benkovac municipality, to announce their arrival. This document and Lucic's testimony shows beyond any doubt that there is only one conclusion possible, namely that Captain Dragan got in touch with the leaders of the Knin Krajina through his own personal connections, through Lucic and Pavic, and that the DB of Serbia, and especially Franko Simatovic, had nothing to do with it whatsoever. These exhibits and this evidence completely take apart the prosecution case concerning the role of Simatovic regarding Captain Dragan's travel to Knin. In reality, at the time when, according to the allegations in the indictment, that is to say April 1991, Franko Simatovic was helping open the center for training in Golubic, and when, according to the indictment, the joint criminal enterprise had already been in place, Captain Dragan was in fact under surveillance by the SDB Belgrade, namely by Dragan Filipovic and Franko Simatovic. It is especially important for the Simatovic defense that the operative technical measures of wiretapping against Snedden was also used in April 1991. But there is a conspicuous absence of any results of this surveillance in the second half of May, June, and July 1991. In the second half of August 1991, Daniel Snedden's telephone is tapped again. The only reasonable conclusion is that Snedden was not in Belgrade at that time. and that's why he did not use the telephones that were being wiretapped. And therefore could not be intercepted. The only thing that makes sense is that in this period it was necessary to apply other operative measures of following Captain Dragan's activities in the territory of the SFRY. These activities and the defense's conclusion together with the earlier cited exhibit P242 and the order of the Interior Minister introducing the operative action Spider, PAOK, in 1991 clearly demonstrates this. We have no time to deal with this any further, and we refer the trial chamber to the segment of our final trial brief that discusses the topic at length. However, the prosecution puts its case in a very skewed manner without any foundation in the evidence. All the evidence led by the defense, at the very least, cast a reasonable doubt on the prosecution's case that Simatovic had anything to do with sending Captain Dragan to Knin and setting up the center in Golubic. The only reasonable thing to do at that time was to apply different measures, different operative methods of following Captain Dragan's activities. And that was the main reason, along with the increasing tensions and worsening situation in the Knin Krajina, why the DB of Serbia and its leadership had decided to send its operative officers to follow Snedden in the Knin Krajina and to follow his activities. This is corroborated by P242 and the order issued by the Interior Minister introducing Operation PAOK. In paragraphs 89 and 178, the prosecution alleges that Simatovic exercised power and influence over Serbian structures in the SBWS through his operatives and associates of the SDB placed in positions of power. The prosecution stresses that the most important agents of the SDB in the SBWS were Ilija Kojic and Rade Kostic. We wish to draw the trial chamber's attention to something that the prosecution mentioned yesterday in the closing argument. They said that Kojic had been a DB associate and an associate of Jovica Stanišic back from mid-1990. They also mentioned that in June 1991, Stanišic deployed Radoslav Kostic in SBWS. Now, when we have in mind the position occupied by Franko Simatovic in 1990 and 1991 in the Belgrade Center of the State Security, and this is something we discussed at length, then the prosecution's claim that Simatovic had exercised power and influence over the Serbian structures in the SBWS through these two operative officers is exposed in all its absurdity. In the final trial brief, paragraphs 89, 90, 162 and on, the prosecution maintains that Simatovic had contributed to the common criminal purpose also by using satellite units of the DB, such as the Serbian Volunteers Guard and the Scorpions, to arm, train, finance, and otherwise support, direct, and deploy Serb forces. For the trial chamber to have a clear picture as to how unfounded these claims are, we want to highlight a few facts about the Serbian Volunteers Guard, the way it was established, the way it operated. From the whole body of evidence and the exhibits that both we and the prosecution had admitted into the case file, we can clearly conclude there is nothing allowing us to conclude that Simatovic had taken any part in the establishment of the SDG, nor that these units had at any time relevant to this indictment been under the control of the SDB of the Republic of Serbia. Any reasonable trier of fact basing themselves on the totality of the factual evidence in this case would have no choice but to conclude that the SDB of Serbia had nothing to do with the establishment of these units, and that these units had at no point of their existence been under the control or associated with the SDB of Serbia. Željko Ražnatović Arkan, with a group of his friends, set up the Serbian Volunteers Guard on 11 October 1990 at a monastery called Pokajnica near Velika Plana in Serbia. That's Exhibit 2D 477, page 191. We had the defense witness Stojan Novakovic, OFS 29, when he said that he was in that group of about 20 football supporters. They were sitting in Željko's pastry shop when he invited them all to go to the monastery and to make an oath at the altar that they would defend the Serbian people wherever they are in danger. They chose that monastery called Repentance for two reasons, the witness told us. Because it was not far from Belgrade, just 100 kilometers, because they did not want publicity and they didn't want to draw attention to themselves, and because that's where the killer of the Serbian leader Karađorđe had repented, which was supposed to be a symbol of the aim, the oath that a Serb would never go against a Serb. In the whole case file, there is not a single piece of evidence that Simatovic had anything to do with the establishment of the SDG. Željko Ražnatović Arkan used to be the leader of the football club supporters Red Star. Radmilo Bogdanovic used to be an interior minister of Serbia and was also from mid-1991 president of the board for Serbia's relations with outside Serbia.
Bogdanović je
In 1993, while developments were in progress, Bogdanovic gave an interview to the Belgrade weekly Duga and spoke about his relationship with Arkan. He said that on several occasions, while they were both in the Red Star football club, he warned Arkan that the MUP of Serbia would no longer tolerate the things previously tolerated by the federal SUP. To the journalist's question as to what Arkan did in Erdut, Bogdanovic replied that as the president of the Committee on Serbs outside Serbia, he knew very well that Arkan gathered about 250 to 300 volunteers, and that Bogdanovic referred him to General Simovic, the Minister of Defense of the Republic of Serbia. Arkan did that. And then they registered as volunteers to go to Erdut. In addition to Franko Simatovic having nothing to do with the setting up of the Serbian volunteer guard, Franko Simatovic also didn't have anything to do with the deployment of Arkan and the SDG troops in Erdut, which was their seat until the end of the relevant period. Besides the relationship with Bogdanovic as the Minister of Defense and subsequently the President of the Parliamentary Committee on Relations with Serbs outside Serbia, Arkan had very good relations with the Ministry of Defense of the Republic of Serbia, impersonated by Minister Simovic. Witness OFS 29 was personally present when Arkan went to Simovic to discuss matters with the Ministry of Defense. The witness was there when Simovic referred Arkan to the Territorial Defense Staff, and when he told him that him and his group could go to Croatia as a group of volunteers, but only as a TO unit. As of then on, they became the SDG, the Serbian Volunteer Guard. With regard to the deployment and arming of the SDG, the defense should like to say the following. OFS 9 defense witness testified before the trial chamber that in early 1992, when he came to Erdut as a volunteer, he was given a form to fill out. He was supposed to hand it over to Jovan Dimitrievich. He also received an olive drab uniform similar to the former JNA uniform. The witness later pointed out that those first uniforms had indeed been issued by the JNA, and that he recognized that uniform in a video clip that was shown to him, and that Arkan worn to the burial of his friend Bratic, the commander of the Novi Sad Corps. Further on, when asked whether SDG members received anything else but uniforms, the witness replied that from the Army of Yugoslavia, besides uniforms, they were also issued with weapons and all the relevant equipment such as ammunition, Zolas, bombs, grenades, and OSAs. The witness joined the SDG in early 1992, but he testified that he had learned the facts not only from one source, but from 3 different sources. He learned that from Arkan himself, who was his first source and who personally told him all that, namely that they received weapons from the Army of Yugoslavia, because that was based on the agreement that was reached between Arkan and Minister Simovic. General Bijorčević was the second source. The witness became very good friends with him, and he confirmed everything to the witness. According to Dobrila Glišić, who was his third source and the author of the book about the events, she knew everything because she was General Simovic's office manager, and the witness knew her personally. The witness heard from her about a meeting between Arkan and Simovic. The witness added to that he knew that Radmilo Bogdanovic referred Arkan to General Simovic. The same witness confirmed that Arkan told Bogdanovic that him and some other supporters had decided to set up the SDG and to go to Slavonia to fight there. Arkan requested Bogdanovic to supply him with weapons and equipment. And that's why Bogdanovic referred him to General Tomislav Simovic. Numerous pieces of evidence clearly and unambiguously show that Arkan when he was at the Crvena Zvezda football club, requested help from Radmilo Bogdanovic so as to be able to go to Slavonia, to Erdut, with his volunteers. Then Bogdanovic referred him to the Minister of Defense, General Simovic, as we have already said. Simovic received him as a volunteer. Simovic was the one who was in charge of the volunteers whom he had to resubordinate to the TEO. And that's why the volunteers considered him their supreme commander. The government of the autonomous region of SBWS was already in place in September 1991. The president of that government was Goran Hadžić. On 21 September 1991, as the president of that government, based on the conclusions of staff commanders, issued an order that Željko Ražnatović Arkan be appointed the commander of the TEO center in Erdut, who was the previous commander of the special units of the territorial defense of SBWS. According to this order, he was to assume duties on the 21st September 1991. We would like to highlight that that was one of the first orders that Goran Hadžić issued as the president of the government. We would like to refer the trial chamber to exhibit number 2D49. RFJ 144 confirmed that Radovan Stojić Baja told him that the TO had to follow the instructions issued by the JNA and that Baja himself was under the JNA command. He expressly confirmed that TO volunteers were subordinated to the JNA and that they were under the JNA command. That witness knows that in the territory of SBWS, the Novi Sad Corps was deployed and that Baja was the commander of the territorial defense of the region. The witness knows that the JNA supplied TIA with weaponry and equipment. This witness also testified that Arkan was a volunteer, that he bore TO insignia, and that he was under the TO command. The witness pointed out that Arkan, during the military operation in the region, was under the command of the JNA, and that the commander of the Novi Sad Corps, Andrija Bjorčević, employed him to the parts of the battlefield where the fiercest battles were waged. Arkan used vehicles of the JNA. OFS 29 confirms all the facts about which numerous witnesses testified. He confirms that the SDG wore olive drab uniforms of the JNA that they received from General Simovic from the TO depot. He also confirms that Željko Raznatović Arkan wanted to have the best equipment for his troops. That's why he found a tailor in Novi Sad, whose name was Slan Kamenac, and he was supposed to make SDG uniforms modeled after the uniforms that a certain man called Filimovic donated from Canada. Why does the defense emphasize the numerous exhibits and all of the details? Because they refute very strongly the prosecutor's allegations, according to which the SDG acted under the authority of the DB and Franko Simatovic. Also, besides the absence of any role in deployment, arming, equipping the center used by the SDG in Erdut, people also had to be fed. Witness Jovan Dimitrijević testified before this trial chamber and confirmed that he was in charge of the logistics for the center, both in Erdut and later in Belgrade. That witness, as well as other witnesses, confirmed that all the necessities for the SDG were procured by the Ministry of Defense and Milanovic Mrgud. The Ministry of Defense of the SBWS covered all the costs of the center, according to that witness. The defense concludes that at the time when Arkan was setting up the SDG, when he was equipping the SDG, and when together with his guards as part of the TO was deployed in Erdut in the SBWS, he closely cooperated with the following individuals. Radmilo Bogdanovic, who up to May 1991 was the Republican Secretary of the Interior and then in charge of the relations with Serbs outside Serbia. General Tomislav Simovic, Radovan Stojičić Bađa, General Bratic, the first commander of the Novi Sad Corps of the JNA, General Andrija Bjorčević, who succeeded Bratic as the commander of the Novi Sad Corps, and finally Milan Milanovic Mrgud, the assistant minister in charge of SBWS. We would like to say that during the relevant period, up to May 1992, Franko Simatovic was just an operative in a section of the 2nd Department of the Belgrade Center of the DB. All of the individuals mentioned previously, in terms of their position, significance, and influence, were far above the position, significance, and influence of Franko Simatovic. The prosecutor did not present a single piece of evidence that might show that during the years 1991 and 1992, Franko Simatovic and Željko Ražnatović Arkan had any points in common. Therefore, it is clear that Franko Simatovic did not have anything to do with the setting up, arming, equipping, feeding, or training of Arkan's SDG members. The question arises as to how come that in their final brief and closing argument, the prosecution claims that in Slavonija Baranja and Western Srem, inter alia units of the SDG were actually Simatovic, through the SDG, contributed to the joint purpose. Many witnesses testified, many exhibits were presented about the participation of Željko Ražnatović Arkan and SDG in operations in Bijeljina and Zvornik in the spring of 1992. The defense will try to sum up the testimony and exhibits which, beyond any reasonable doubt, demonstrate that Arkan and his SDG went there as a volunteer upon the invitation of the highest political and military leadership of Republika Srpska, and that Franko Simatovic had nothing whatsoever to do with the deployment of Arkan and the SDG in Bijeljina and Zvornik. He also didn't have anything to do with the operations that Arkan and his guards carried out when they were there. OFS 13, in his testimony, said that in March 1992, and we know that the attack on Bijeljina was carried out during the night between 31 March and 1 April, so that in March 1993, when she was in the center, Biljana Plavšić sent an invitation to Arkan to help Serbs in Bijeljina, Tuzla, and Zvornik. OFS 29 also confirmed that fact and adds to it that he is also aware of the letter that Biljana Plavšić sent to Arkan. This is Exhibit 2D 429, OFS 29, 6 October 2020, testimony on pages 45 and 46. OFS 13 was shown a video clip, 2D 436, which is Arkan's interview given in real time, in which Arkan himself confirms and says that his guards were invited by the SDS to go to Bijeljina, and that they did indeed go there overnight and took Bijeljina in a day. After taking over Bijeljina, there are video materials and witnesses who confirm that Arkan met with Fikret Abdic, Biljana Plavšić, and General Prašević, a JNA General Prašević. OFS 29 claims that 2 days after the taking of Bijeljina, he went there with Goran Hadžić. He asked Goran Hadžić, actually Arkan asked Goran Hadžić why he hadn't been there a day before when Arkan met with those individuals, Plavšić, Abdic, and Generals Prašević and Janković. The generals told him then, according to the testimony of this witness, that he shouldn't go to Tuzla, but rather to Zvornik. At this point, we would like to highlight the video clips 2D441 and P02312, which show that in Bijeljina, Arkan met with Plavšić, Abdic, and the aforementioned JNA generals Prašević and Janković. OFS 13 testified before the trial chamber about the departure of Arkan and SDG members to Zvornik a few days after the operation in Bijeljina. The witness was aware of the fact that Arkan and the SDG went to Zvornik on the instructions of Biljana Plavšić and the JNA generals, since they were working on the liberation of Zvornik in cooperation with the JNA. During this trial, P3113 was admitted into evidence, and that exhibit shows that the commander of the 17th Corps, General Sava Janković, requested from the command of the 2nd Military Administration to deploy JNA troops in Kula, in Zvornik. In the request, it is clear that the demand was based on the request to neutralize the forces which opened fire on his units. A few days before the operation in Zvornik, besides Fikret Abdic, Biljana Plavšić, and General Prašević, the aforementioned General Janković was there in Bijeljina. The only reasonable conclusion is that at that meeting, the operation to liberate Zvornik was agreed there and then, and that Arkan and the SDG participated together with the 17th Corps under the command of General Janković. Numerous exhibits, testimonies, and photos which were presented during this case by the defense clearly and unambiguously show that Arkan and his SDG arrived in Bijeljina and Zvornik at the invitation of the political leadership of Republika Srpska and Biljana Plavšić personally. It is also clear that in the operation to liberate Zvornik, Arkan and his SDG acted in coordination with the JNA. Arkan received a pistol as a reward for the liberation of Zvornik. In the photos which were admitted into evidence, 2D480, 2D481, and 2D482, it can be seen that at the ceremony. He's seen sitting in the first row next to President Karadzic and the Ministry of the Interior of the Republika Srpska, Tomo Kovac. Those photos do not depict either Franko Simatovic or anybody from the DB of the Republic of Serbia.
We're now in open session, Your Honor.
Dakle, OFS 24.
So, OFS 24 testified before this trial chamber that the Scorpions had been a unit in the territory of the SBWS, and that toward the end of 1991, the director of the oil industry of Krajina, Petar Golubovic, had demanded that this unit be set up. He demanded it from the government of Krajina. This witness submitted a document to this tribunal from which one can see that the government of the SBWS had made the decision to establish this unit in order to secure the oil fields. So far as he remembers, the government's decision was made in December 1991 or January 1992. OFS 24 testified that immediately after their inception in 1992, the Scorpions had been under the command of the TO SBWS all the way until the signing of the Vance Plan in spring 1992, when the Scorpions became a special police unit of the RSK, or the Blue Brigade, which they remained until 1993 and the attack on the Maslenica bridge. At that time, that is to say the beginning of 93, RSK had already established its own army, and the Scorpions became a unit of the army of the Republic of Serbia and Krajina. In the words of this witness, the main task of the unit to secure oil fields never changed from the time they were established, when they were under the command of the TO. And so it didn't change either at the time when they were a special police unit of the MUP Krajina, or when they became the RSK army. The witness added that they would occasionally send a battalion to assist in the lower part of the RSK in the Republika Srpska. For the entire duration of the conflict, the witness testified that the unit was based in SBWS, and they would only occasionally go out to help in the lower part of RSK and Republika Srpska. That's 2D 520, page 47, and 2D 87. In direct examination, speaking about the sending of Scorpions to Trnovo, this witness said he had had a meeting with Radovan Stojčić-Bađa at Bađa's office in the MUP of Serbia. There were Bađa, Kojić, and Ljubo Milojević, who represented the Plavi unit from the Vukovar SUP. The witness said that Bađa had invited them and told them that Republika Srpska was facing huge problems, that it was under attack from the Muslims from all sides, and they needed the Scorpions unit together with the Arkan unit and some SUP units to help the army of Republika Srpska for a month, Toward the end of June and in July 1995,
Identification.
Da, hvala. Ja se
I thank my learned friend. Perhaps we should go into private session and then I will explain my possible lack of caution.
We're back in open session now.
Tužilaštvo se u svoj završnoj reči
In their closing arguments, the prosecution relied on the testimony of this witness, Mr. Stoparic, RFJ 28, and stated that it was this witness who had testified that in '93, at some informal meeting in Novi Sad, was the moment when the Scorpions were established. Our defense has presented a lot of evidence, including testimony by the defense minister, who was in charge of this unit during its entire existence. Evidence to the contrary. We also have to bear in mind that OFS 24 testified to the same thing. The credibility of witness Stoparic was always in doubt, as his testimony was variable and inconsistent. He himself said that he had changed his testimony at one trial in Prokuplje as advised by his lawyer, and he admitted that he had lied at that trial. You can find that in the transcript of 30th November 2011, page. The interpreter didn't catch it. The witness stated before you that he had accepted the suggestion of Prosecutor Groom that he had applied to the Scorpions in July '95, not in June. The witness admits that Prosecutor Groom wanted to link him to the operation in Trnovo, which would mean that Stoparic was already then a member of the RDB of Serbia, which is not true, and that's something that both the witness and Prosecutor Groom know. You can find that RFJ 28 transcript, 9 November 2018, page 52, and P805. So the witness said that he had applied to the RDB in June, which is not true, and he admitted so. All this evidence shows that the prosecution has failed to show beyond any reasonable doubt that there is any link between Franco Simatovic and the Scorpions unit, or that he had ever been in that area. Franco Simatovic had never been in the area of Mount Reskovice. The defense has proven that in July 1995, Franco Simatovic had not been at all in that territory. The defense is convinced that there is every reason for this trial chamber to pronounce an acquittal for Simatovic, and that the trial chamber will indeed do that when they take into account all the arguments presented by this defense orally and in their final trial brief. All that Simatovic ever did was in keeping with the rules of the service that he belonged to, with the legislation and the constitution of the country in which he lived. Simatovic was an intelligence officer. He conducted intelligence work also beyond the borders of his own country. All these activities are defined by the rules of the service from which Simatovic never departed. Simatovic never committed a crime. Simatovic didn't help any crime to be committed. We also have a segment of our presentation regarding sentencing, for which I have no time left, but we indicated there all the mitigating circumstances. I can only now express my hope and conviction that the trial chamber will have understanding and sensitivity for all the reasons that led Franco Simatovic to be subjected to these proceedings for 20 years. My learned friend said yesterday that Franco Simatovic had often been in the detention unit, but he had also spent a lot of time at home over the past 18 years. But as my colleague, Mr. Jodesh, said, the prosecution breaches the rule of presumption of innocence very often. For 18 years, Franco Simatovic has been in detention. One cannot view as a benefit the fact that a man who is still innocent occasionally goes home on provisional release, because his freedom is very limited. Thank you, Your Honors.
Crash. So we take the adjournment to reconvene at 9:30 tomorrow morning.
All rise. We will away.